I think one of the questions our practices has been trying to deal with is the general status of architectural knowledge and the idea of an expert generalist versus an architect with specific expertise. And so where can a practice currently position itself between these two things? Because if you get rid of a specific architectural expertise, then you really have no means of engagement. If you don't do buildings, then your initial means of engaging in the world is kind of undermined. So we're trying to figure out what kind of balance we can find between having kind of broader engagement that possibly could transcend architecture, but also remain specifically within a discipline.
In some ways, it seems like as young professionals, there's always a sort of anxiety to start, to do, and it seems like building is perhaps a little bit more difficult to get into, at least at the scale that would be desired. And so some of these other options and platforms also, could potentially provide an avenue for work or service.
I think architects will always do buildings, and it's absolutely necessary because that is as a discipline, that's what people expect from us, and that's where we generate this incredible amount of knowledge when we have to make buildings, when we have to negotiate within the complex systems, in order to build like a skyscraper per se. There's an incredible amount of knowledge that is generated from that. But in addition to that, we know that particular invisible knowledge isn't necessarily made public. And so one of the things we're interested in is kind of expanding the expectations of what it means to be an architect. So, the way of thinking that you have to go through as an architect could have implications beyond building. But, we're definitely interested in, buildings.
So the Times Square project began last year when we were approached by the deputy of press for the Pentagon, the Defense Department. And we were basically asked to investigate the site of the Times Square Recruiting Center, which it currently has a recruiting center there, and it's actually an extremely successful recruiting center. But what the Defense Department was hoping for was some new way of engaging the site of Times Square, because it's such an exceptional content, such an incredible environment which they could engage the public with. So rather than kind of sticking with a conventional recruiting center, they were looking for some new way of kind of reestablishing the identity of the military and its presence in the public. And it was kind of an open-ended discussion, a call for something new and not really prescribed at all. So we were more or less looking at ways that we could exploit the context of Times Square and the hypermedia environment, the hyper-publicity of the site. And we were thinking of ways in which the military could kind of overcome its distance from public life and kind of military life versus domestic life. And so we're thinking that you might find some sort of medium in the kind of familiar domestic environment of a lifestyle center, which is in the last 10 years has become this kind of machine to transform people's lives. And so we're thinking, rather than having this kind of static prescribed recruiting center, we could have a military lifestyle center. And the idea is that it would be a venue to domesticate all the technology which the military has been developing in the last, say 5-6 years. So we looked at the budget of the military, which is $147 billion was spent last year on the development of new technology. So we thought there must be some way of domesticizing those technologies as a way of becoming part of the conventional American lifestyle. And so then there's this pragmatic components to it, but really it's a big machine for domesticating the military in public life.
Well, we actually got invited to produce something for 306090 for the Mies project. And so we took a look at decoration as a theme, and we started thinking about what sort of forms of contemporary forms of decoration that could provide a new way of looking at the topic, basically. So we went to Mies and Seagram's Tower and realized that Mies, in fact, is using a very standard, typical, modern mass-produced element, the I-beam, as a form of decoration on the facade. And so we found it as an opportunity to take a look at mass customization in ways that you can manipulate that object, that piece that's very familiar to all, and manipulate it in a way which produces a new image for the facade and develops a sort of discussion about the possibility of the endless pursuit of technique, which seems so common today. And so it was really kind of an analytical project that is questioning sort of what's at stake with this image-making machine, mass customization for the facade.
The mass customization, which is something, a word that you hear very frequently, but I think is most accessible in the idea of a facelift, where you're not actually adding the material, you're just cutting and removing, replacing different material. The idea is that you could create a new identity without actually adding or taking away anything. So it's ultra minimalist in a sense, but it's ultra expressive at the same time.
I think it's definitely an exciting time to be an architect right now, given the kind of level that technology has been incorporated into both like the design of architecture and also the fabrication or the building of architecture. But I think one thing that we're interested in is going beyond a fetishization of technique or technology and ask the question always, what does technique give you? Is it only basically technique needs to have strategies or kind of larger agenda to drive it in order to have significance. So I think that's kind of one question we're dealing with. It's not necessarily ignore everything that's been accomplished with new technologies, but try to work with them in a more kind of critical way. Because I think there's a period of time where it was so easy to be fascinated with all these new technologies, and that was a really great point for architecture because it expanded the possibilities. But I think now we're at a point in time where we have to kind of critically look at what possibilities they generate and kind of try to redefine what architects can give.